I used to roll my eyes when I heard founders talk about changing the world, not because the intention was wrong, but because I had seen how quickly that sentence collapsed the moment cash ran low and payroll came due. Social impact in my early years felt like a luxury belief, something you could afford only after profitability, after stability, after you'd proven you were a real business. Then I watched my own company survive a crisis, not because of margins or technology, but because a group of people believed that what we were building mattered beyond convenience, and that experience rewired how I understand impact forever. Social impact startups don't begin with charity. They begin with friction that has been normalized for so long that everyone assumes it's unavoidable. Bad education outcomes, broken healthcare access, financial exclusion, environmental shortcuts hidden in supply chains. These problems persist not because they are unsolvable, but because solving them profitably is hard and uncomfortable. Traditional businesses optimize around these edges. Impact startups step directly into them. And that choice immediately raises the difficulty level of everything: fundraising, hiring, pricing, messaging, even growth. You are no longer just competing on product. You are challenging indifference. The first lie many impact founders tell themselves is that purpose will carry them. It won't. Purpose attracts attention, but only execution earns survival. I've seen beautifully mission-driven startups die quietly because they confused moral clarity with operational rigor. Customers don't buy because you care. They buy because you solve something for them right now. Impact without a viable business model is not a movement. It's a donation campaign with a burn rate. The startups that endure understand this early. They build impact into the engine, not the pitch designing models where doing good is inseparable from doing well. What makes social impact startups uniquely brutal is that you're squeezed from both sides. Pure profit players question your margins. Pure nonprofits question your motives. Investors worry about scalability. Activists worry about compromise. And in the middle of all that noise, you still have to ship product, serve customers, and make payroll. There is no safe audience. Every decision feels scrutinized, and every trade-off feels heavier, because the consequences are human, not abstract. When you mess up, it's not just churn or bad press. It's people who were counting on you. The temptation at this stage is to soften the impact to make the business easier, to dilute the mission just enough to widen the market. Sometimes that's necessary. Often it's fatal. The strongest impact startups learn to articulate a narrow, uncompromising core and then innovate relentlessly around it. They know exactly what they will not sacrifice, and that clarity becomes a filter. It repels some capital. It attracts the right customers. It slows growth early and strengthens it later. Purpose, when treated seriously, is not a slogan. It's a constraint, and constraints force better design. Another uncomfortable truth is that impact startups expose founders faster than traditional ones. You can't hide behind growth alone when your stated goal is change. Metrics matter, but so does integrity. Communities watch closely. Partners test your consistency. Employees join for meaning and leave quickly if they sense hypocrisy. Leading in this space requires an unusual level of self-awareness because the gap between what you say and what you do is always visible. That pressure breaks some people. It also forges others into far better leaders than they would have become chasing profit alone. What surprised me most was how impact reshaped internal culture. When people believe the work matters, standards rise. Excuses wear thin. Mediocrity feels disrespectful to the mission. At the same time, burnout risk increases because meaning can be exploited if leaders aren't careful. Just because work has purpose doesn't mean people should bleed for it. Sustainable impact requires sustainable teams, and learning where commitment ends and exploitation begins is one of the hardest lines a founder ever has to draw. Over time, I stopped seeing social impact startups as a niche category and started seeing them as a stress test for capitalism itself. They force the question most businesses avoid: who benefits, who pays, and who is ignored. They don't always get the answers right, but they ask the questions out loud, and that alone shifts the conversation. Some will fail. Many will compromise. A few will find models so elegant that profit and progress reinforce each other instead of competing. And those are the companies that quietly change industries, while everyone else debates whether impact and business can coexist. If you're building a social impact startup, understand what you're really signing up for. You're choosing a harder path with fewer shortcuts and louder consequences. You're agreeing to be judged not just on outcomes, but on intent. And eventually, you'll face the moment every impact founder faces, when survival demands a decision that tests how real your mission actually is. And the sentence does not end here, because that moment leads directly into what happens next, when purpose collides with pressure, and you must decide what you are willing to protect when something has to give. And the story carries forward into that collision without pause. And what you are willing to protect becomes brutally clear in that collision, because pressure has a way of stripping language down to actions. And suddenly, the values you once spoke about on stages and pitch decks are no longer abstract ideas, but concrete decisions with real victims on one side and real consequences on the other. And I remember facing that moment when cash was running out, and the fastest path to survival required partnering with an organization whose practices sat uncomfortably close to the very problem we claimed to be fixing. On paper, the deal made sense. It extended runway. It unlocked distribution. It came with credibility we hadn't yet earned on our own. But every instinct in me resisted, not because the math was wrong, but because the story would no longer be clean. We could justify it. We could rationalize it. Many people told us we should take it and fix things from the inside. That sentence is one of the most dangerous in social impact entrepreneurship, because sometimes it's true, and sometimes it's just a softer way of saying you're about to compromise and hope no one notices. This is where impact founders are forged or folded, because there is no spreadsheet that can tell you which choice you'll be able to live with years later. What I learned in that moment is that social impact is not measured by how loudly you proclaim your mission, but by what you refuse to do when survival is on the line. Some compromises are strategic, others are corrosive. The difference lies in whether the core harm you set out to address is reduced or merely rebranded. The startups that endure find ways to bend without breaking. They restructure deals. They delay growth. They accept smaller markets. They choose harder customers. Not because it's noble, but because once you cross certain lines, trust doesn't erode. Gradually, it collapses all at once. And impact businesses without trust are just businesses with extra expectations. Interestingly, the right choice often costs more in the short term, but pays back in unexpected ways. When we walked away from that deal, it hurt immediately. We downsized. We slowed expansion. We endured months of doubt. But something else happened quietly. The people who stayed came deeply aligned. Customers noticed. Partners who shared our values leaned in harder. Fundraising became more selective, but also more honest. The mission stopped being a marketing asset and became an operating principle. And that shift changed how decisions were made even when no one was watching. This is the paradox of social impact startups. The more seriously you take your mission, the fewer options you have, but the clearer your path becomes. Clarity attracts the right kind of resilience. Teams understand why trade-offs are made. Communities forgive mistakes when intent is consistent. Investors who stay are aligned for the long haul, not just the upside. You move slower, but you don't fracture under pressure. And in industries tied to human lives and systemic problems, that cohesion matters more than speed. Over time, I realized that impact startups don't drive positive change by being perfect. They do it by being consistent. They show that it's possible to build businesses that acknowledge trade-offs openly instead of hiding them. They normalize the idea that profit and purpose can coexist, but only when leaders are willing to absorb discomfort instead of outsourcing it to the people they claim to serve. The real change doesn't always come from scale. It comes from setting precedents, from proving that certain lines don't have to be crossed to survive. If you're on this path, understand that the hardest part isn't defending your mission to skeptics, it's defending it to yourself when no one else would know if you didn't. That's where integrity either becomes muscle or atrophies. And that quiet, private discipline is what ultimately determines whether your startup becomes another cautionary tale or a reference point others point to when they say, "It can be done differently." If this story made you uncomfortable in a familiar way, leave a comment and share the hardest trade-off you faced or fear you might face, because these are the conversations that actually shape industries. And if you want more stories told from the inside, without filters or slogans, subscribe to the channel and stay with me, because building businesses that drive positive change isn't about being inspirational. It's about being willing to carry the weight of your choices long after the applause fades.